I betrayed the man who trusted me, my husband. Tommy. I crossed a line I can never uncross. Not out of love, but out of selfishness, weakness, and need. I let desire blind me. Let loneliness become an excuse. I let his father touch me, kiss me, see parts of me that were never his to claim. And for what? A flicker of attention? I shattered my marriage for a moment of feeling alive. Now I can't look Tommy in the eye. I disgust myself. If you're angry, you should be. I deserve it. I destroyed something sacred, and the worst part is, I knew exactly what I was doing. It all started on an ordinary Sunday evening in the quiet western edge of a city that rarely stirred after dusk. Our home, nestled between rows of identical stucco houses, was filled with the comforting smell of garlic roasted chicken and fresh bread. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting warm amber light across our dining room. Tommy, my husband, had invited his father Edward over, nothing unusual. Their relationship had always been polite but distant, and dinner gatherings like this were Tommy's attempt to close the emotional gap. I never paid much attention to Edward before, but that evening, something changed. He walked in wearing a dark wool coat, his silver hair neatly combed, his deep-set eyes calm but alert. When he complimented the meal, his voice was rich and steady, but it was the way he looked at me, like he was really seeing me, that caught me off guard. It wasn't overtly flirtatious, but it lingered. I felt an odd flutter in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The moment passed quickly, but it left behind a current in the air, quiet and invisible, like the shifting of tectonic plates beneath a perfectly still surface. I tried to brush it off, the glance, the flutter, but something about it stayed with me. As the evening went on, I found myself watching Edward without meaning to. The way he rolled up his sleeves just enough to reveal strong forearms. The way his fingers curled gently around his wine glass. Deliberate and calm. Every movement was smooth, unhurried, like a man who'd long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. We all sat around the table, laughter flowing easily between Tommy's half-finished college stories and Edward's dry, well-timed responses, but my awareness of Edward didn't fade. It sharpened. When he looked at me during a joke, our eyes would meet just long enough to quicken my pulse before darting away again, like something too hot to hold. Later, Tommy stepped away to take a call, his laptop already open. Work pulling him out of the moment again. That left me alone with Edward in the kitchen, scraping plates and rinsing wine glasses. The silence should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It pulsed. Every movement felt loaded with unspoken meaning. I bent to place a dish in the lower rack of the dishwasher, and I felt him behind me, not too close, but close enough to feel the warmth of his body. My breath hitched. "You have a beautiful home," he said, voice low, almost husky, "but it's you that makes it feel alive." I froze. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. I turned slowly, unsure what I'd see, but his expression was calm, unreadable, like he hadn't just whispered something that lit a match inside me. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice more breath than sound. His gaze dropped for just a second, my lips, my collarbone, and then back up. His control was absolute, but I could feel the undercurrent, the restraint, the edge of something wild just beneath his surface. "It's strange," he said, tilting his head slightly. "I've known you for years, but tonight, you seem different." My pulse thundered in my ears. I should have said something neutral, polite, but the words that came out surprised me. "Maybe tonight, you're seeing me." The silence that followed was thick, electric. I could feel it crackling between us. And then, as if drawn by gravity, he stepped forward, slowly, testing the space, testing me. My heart pounded against my ribs. I should have stepped back. I didn't. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear, his fingers barely grazing my skin. The touch was featherlight, but I felt it everywhere. I didn't move, didn't speak. Neither did he. Then, suddenly, footsteps. Tommy's voice echoing down the hallway. Edward stepped back just in time, his hands returning to his sides, his expression sliding back into calm. But his eyes burned into mine. Nothing had happened, but everything had. That night, long after the dishes were done and the house had gone still, I lay in bed beside Tommy, staring at the ceiling. He snored lightly, His arm draped across his chest like always. The room was dark, silent, yet I felt anything but calm. My body was still humming from what hadn't happened. That look, that touch, that near step across a line neither of us dared name. I turned onto my side, eyes tracing the soft outline of Tommy's face in the faint glow from the street lamp outside. Guilt gnawed at my stomach. This man, my husband, had done nothing wrong. Not really. He loved me in his way, safe, consistent, predictable, but somewhere along the way, I had faded into the background of our life. A fixture, a routine. And then Edward looked at me like I was something rare, like I still had stories worth hearing, like I wasn't just a woman standing at a sink, but someone who had once been vivid. I couldn't sleep. My fingers hovered over my phone more than once, wanting to text him, needing to say something, but I stopped myself. Until the morning. 9:02 a.m. Thank you for coming last night. It meant a lot. I hit send before I could second guess myself. My heart thudded with the quiet panic of someone who'd just leapt from a ledge. I placed the phone face down and forced myself to make coffee, pretending everything was normal. But minutes later, it buzzed. Edward, the pleasure was mine. You're a wonderful host, and an even better listener. I read it twice, 3 times. I didn't realize I was smiling until I caught my reflection in the microwave door. God. Another buzz. Edward, if you're free sometime, I'd love to finish our conversation. There's a quiet spot by the lake, no distractions. Just you and me. My hand hovered over the screen, and for the briefest moment, I imagined saying no, doing the right thing, shutting it down, but instead, I typed, "Tomorrow afternoon works." The moment I pressed send, I felt it again, that internal shift. The point of no return. I wasn't just responding to a message. I was answering something deeper. A hunger. A longing I'd buried so long I forgot it had a voice. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. I smiled at Tommy's passing jokes, nodded during his work updates, folded laundry, cleaned the bathroom, every task done perfectly, automatically, but my mind was elsewhere. My hands moved, but my thoughts stayed locked on Edward, on what that meeting might mean, on how close we'd come to crossing a line, and how much I wanted to cross it now. That night, I barely slept. Every shadow in the room seemed to whisper what if. Every minute felt stretched and warped by the anticipation curling hot and uneasy in my stomach. Tomorrow wasn't just another meeting. It was a choice, a door opening, and I already knew I was going to walk through it. The lake was about 30 minutes west, tucked between overgrown oaks and quiet residential streets where no one asked questions. It wasn't a place Tommy and I ever visited together, which somehow made it feel like neutral ground, detached from the life I was about to step outside of. That morning, I got dressed with a strange intensity. I told myself I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Still, I changed shirts twice, settled on soft denim and a lightweight blouse. Something effortless, casual, but as I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a stray lock of hair, I couldn't lie to myself. I wanted to be seen. The drive was a blur of anxious thoughts and pounding music. But when I finally parked near the lake, everything slowed. The water glimmered beneath the afternoon sun, the trees casting long shadows that danced along the path. Edward was already there. He stood with his hands in his pockets, leaning slightly against the weathered wood of a bench. His back was to me, but the way his shoulders lifted when he heard my footsteps, it told me he'd been waiting. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said as he turned, his voice low, eyes unreadable. "I wasn't sure either," I replied honestly, my voice tight in my throat. We walked for a while. No real destination, just steps guided by a need to move. He kept a careful distance, close enough to feel present, far enough to give me space. The conversation started simply: weather, childhood summers by the lake, music, but it didn't stay safe for long. Edward stopped near the edge of the water and looked out. "You seemed restless last night," he said. I hesitated. I haven't felt like myself in a long time. His eyes found mine. "And who are you, really?" The question startled me, not because it was inappropriate, but because I didn't know the answer. "I used to know," I admitted, folding my arms across my chest. "Now I just feel like a shadow of who I was." Edward was quiet for a moment. Then, you don't seem like a shadow to me. He stepped closer, just a breath. Not touching, but there. The space between us hummed, vibrating with everything unspoken. You make me feel, he paused. Voice trembling slightly, like I'm not invisible, like someone actually sees me. My throat tightened. That's how you make me feel. I whispered. He reached out, slow and careful, fingers brushing against mine, tentative, asking, and I didn't pull away. I don't want to be careful anymore, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. His hand closed around mine. Firm, warm, real. I know, he murmured. Neither do I. We stood there like that, holding on, not kissing, not touching beyond hands, but it was more intimate than anything I'd felt in years. The kind of closeness that wasn't about the body, but the soul. And in that stillness, under the blue sky and whispering trees, I realized something terrifying and thrilling. I didn't want to stop this. Not yet. The next time he texted me, it wasn't a question, it was a certainty. Edward, come by tomorrow afternoon. I'll cook. No expectations, just us. I stared at the message longer than I should have, my thumb hovering over the screen like touching it would make it more real. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I already knew what I was walking into. The following day, I found myself outside his house, pulse thundering in my ears. I sat in my car for what felt like an hour, hands trembling on the steering wheel, telling myself I could still drive away, but my body refused to move. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately, as though he'd been standing just on the other side, waiting. Come in, Edward sighed gently, stepping aside. The house smelled like cedarwood and something faintly spicy, probably the slow simmering food he'd promised, but the scent that overwhelmed me was him. He wore a crisp white button-down with the sleeves rolled up. And when he smiled, it wasn't polite or formal. It was warm, inviting, dangerous. We made small talk in the kitchen while he stirred a pot of something I couldn't even name. I couldn't focus, not on the food, not on the words. My eyes kept drifting to the way his hands moved. Confident, assured, intentional. You're tense, he observed, not turning around. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He set the spoon down and turned, wiping his hands on a towel. His eyes met mine across the space. No smile, no small talk. Do you want to be here? He asked. His voice low and steady. Yes, I whispered. Then stop pretending like you don't. Before I could respond, he crossed the space between us. Slow, purposeful. I backed into the edge of the counter, breath catching in my throat. His hand came up, not to touch, but to hover, just near my face, waiting. I leaned into it. The moment our lips met, the world cracked open. There was nothing soft or uncertain this time. The kiss was deep, aching, full of everything we'd held back for too long. His hands framed my face, then slid into my hair, pulling me closer until I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. I clutched at his shirt, desperate for something solid to hold onto as heat spread through me like wildfire. My body moved on instinct, arch, lean, reach, everything about it said more. He pulled back just enough to breathe. Our foreheads pressed together. Tell me to stop, he said, voice trembling. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I whispered, don't. His hands found my waist, firm but reverent, and he guided me backward until I felt the soft edge of the couch catch behind my knees. We collapsed together, our kisses growing hungrier, deeper. My skin buzzed with every brush of his fingers, every exhale against my neck. It wasn't just about desire. It was about being remembered, touched like I mattered, seen. And for the first time in years, I did. Afterward, we didn't speak for a while. We lay there tangled on the couch, the air still thick with heat and the scent of skin, wine, and something unspoken. Edward's arm was wrapped around me, his hand drawing lazy circles along my bare shoulder, while my cheek rested against the rise and fall of his chest. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't shut out the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wanted to feel nothing, to float, but instead, I felt everything. Desire, shame, relief, guilt, hunger, fear. I had crossed a line, and not just with my body, but with my soul. Edward tilted his head and kissed my forehead, gently, a touch so tender it undid me more than the lust ever could. You okay? He asked. His voice rough, low. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. Yes, I whispered. No, I don't know. He stroked my hair. I didn't plan this. I know, I said. Neither did I. But we did it anyway. I sat up slowly, pulling the thin throw blanket around my body, trying to make sense of the storm brewing inside me. My skin still buzzed with the memory of his hands. His lips. The way he made me feel real. But beneath it, something darker twisted in my chest. An ache I didn't have a name for. I looked around the living room, cozy, quiet, soaked in golden afternoon light, and realized how surreal it all was. This wasn't just a moment stolen from my life. It was another life entirely. One that didn't belong to me. I should go, I said, standing and reaching for my clothes. Edward sat up too, watching me quietly. You don't have to rush. But I do, I said softly. You know I do. He walked over, placing his hands gently on my waist. I don't regret it, he murmured, searching my face. Not 1 second. I swallowed hard, because that was the difference between us. I wanted to not regret it. I wanted to believe it was worth everything I risked. But I hadn't reached that clarity yet. I leaned in, pressed one last kiss to his mouth, slow, lingering, trembling, and whispered, I don't either, but I'm scared. He nodded, his eyes heavy with something that looked like longing, or maybe loss. So am I. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun was too bright, too clean. It felt like it would burn the truth right off my skin. I slid into my car, gripping the wheel with hands that still remembered his touch. The drive home was silent, but inside me everything screamed. What I did wasn't just a betrayal of Tommy. It was a betrayal of the version of myself I had promised to be. But worse than the guilt was the terrifying, impossible truth. I wanted to do it again. Home was too quiet when I walked through the door. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, everything felt louder than it should have. I half expected the walls to whisper liar as I passed. Tommy was in the den, hunched over his laptop, Bluetooth headset in place, animatedly talking about quarterly numbers. He glanced up when I passed and smiled. Hey, babe, he mouthed silently, giving me a thumbs up before turning back to his screen. I stood there for a moment, staring at him, at this man who had no idea that I had just undone everything we'd ever built. My stomach turned. I walked into the kitchen, washed my hands for longer than necessary, scrubbing until my skin felt raw. I caught my reflection in the window, my lips still slightly swollen. My hair tousled in a way no one would question. But I knew, my body was still humming with Edward's memory. My skin still ached where he had touched me. I wanted to cry. I wanted to not cry. Instead, I opened a bottle of wine. When Tommy finally ended his call, he walked in and kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. I flinched, just barely, but enough for me to feel it. You okay? He asked. Brow furrowed. You look a little tired. I didn't sleep well last night. I lied, pouring myself a second glass before finishing the first. Just need to unwind. He nodded and started scrolling on his phone, already drifting back into the world he understood best, emails, contracts, productivity apps. I sat across from him, pretending to listen as he talked about work. But all I could hear was Edward's voice. You deserve to be seen. I wanted to scream, to confess, to shake Tommy and beg him to look at me, really see me, before it was too late. But I stayed silent, smiled where I should, nodded on cue, played the role. Later that night, as he fell asleep beside me, snoring softly, I stared at the ceiling again. It was darker now, heavier. I turned toward him, studying the slope of his nose, the curve of his shoulder under the blanket. We'd shared this bed for years. We'd shared birthdays, holidays, tears, and laughter. But in that moment, he felt miles away, not because he didn't love me, but because somewhere along the way, I had started to disappear in his gaze. And then I remembered Edward's hands, the way they had lingered, not just to take, but to appreciate, to worship. Desire burned under my skin again, hot and shameful. I pressed my thighs together beneath the sheets, horrified by the way my body still responded. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't me. But the truth settled deep in my bones. It was me now. And worse, I didn't want to forget it. Not yet. It had been almost a week since that afternoon at Edward's house. We hadn't spoken since. No calls, no texts, nothing. I told myself it was for the best, that the silence was necessary. That distance was the only way to avoid unraveling completely. But that didn't stop me from craving him. It built like a pressure under my skin. Quiet but constant. I would catch myself lost in thought while folding laundry. My body still remembering the weight of his against mine. The warmth of his breath against my throat. At night, I'd reach across the bed and find only cold sheets. Even with Tommy sleeping next to me. Then came the moment I never saw coming. I was in the kitchen, cutting strawberries for a tart I wasn't even hungry for, when I heard the back door creak open. I turned, startled, and there he was. Edward, standing in the doorway like a storm I hadn't prepared for. My breath caught. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low, eyes darting toward the hallway. "I couldn't stay away," he said, closing the door behind him. "I needed to see you." He stepped forward, slow, as if reading my body's panic and desire. I wanted to run. I wanted to reach for him. "I don't think this is a good idea," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but I also know you're not sleeping. That you've been thinking about that day as much as I have." He was right. The ache had settled in my chest like a second heartbeat. I dropped the knife, wiped my hands on a towel, and stared at him. "Tommy's upstairs." He was quiet for a beat. "Then I'll leave, unless you ask me to stay." That single sentence made my pulse explode in my ears. The silence between us vibrated with danger, heat, and unsaid truth. I should have told him to go. Every voice in my head screamed it. But instead, I moved toward him. We didn't kiss. Not this time. We just stood there, close. Not touching, our breaths tangling in the air between us. "I hate how much I want this," I whispered. He exhaled sharply. "Me too." Suddenly, the front door opened, loud. Casual. Tommy's voice followed. "Hey babe, I forgot my..." We jumped apart like magnets repelling. I darted to the sink, turning the water on, while Edward moved toward the back door. Smooth and silent. Tommy rounded the corner, keys in hand. He smiled, completely unaware. "You okay?" "Yeah," I breathed, too quickly, just startled. He kissed my cheek and walked out. Door slamming behind him. I didn't move. Edward stood frozen, half in shadow, still inside. "We can't do this here," I whispered. His jaw clenched. "Then tell me where." I didn't answer. But I didn't tell him to leave, either. And that said more than any yes ever could. That night, I couldn't sleep, even with the windows cracked open and the cool breeze drifting across the sheets. My skin felt fevered, restless. Tommy lay beside me, arm flung across his chest, lost in a dreamless sleep. The rise and fall of his breathing only made the silence louder. My mind spun, caught in a loop of Edward's voice. His nearness, the way we had nearly been caught. The image of him standing in the doorway, still, waiting, needing, was burned into my thoughts. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was addiction. He had become the only place I felt awake. Around 2 a.m., I slipped out of bed, wrapping a light cardigan around me as I stepped onto the back porch with a glass of wine. The sky was a deep, velvety blue, stars scattered like secrets no one dared speak aloud. The stillness was almost cruel. Out here, with nothing to distract me. The truth pressed in from all sides. I'd crossed a line, and I couldn't go back. What terrified me more wasn't that I'd betrayed Tommy. It was that I didn't regret it the way I should. The ache I carried wasn't just guilt. It was longing. I missed Edward, his touch. Yes, but also the way he made me feel visible. Important. Like I wasn't just someone's wife. Or someone's daughter-in-law. But a woman with a soul that hadn't been touched in years. I thought about telling Tommy. I'd come close a few times, moments where my voice nearly cracked from the weight of it all. But I couldn't do it. What would confession solve? It wouldn't erase what I'd done. It wouldn't undo the kiss, the couch, the whispers that only Edward and I would ever understand. And maybe that was the real problem. Because part of me didn't want to undo it. I sipped my wine, eyes tracing the line of the fence, the shape of the dark trees beyond. I tried to imagine what the next weeks would look like if nothing changed. If I kept pretending. If I kept letting my marriage exist in its quiet decay while my heart lived somewhere else. But something had changed. I wasn't the same woman I'd been just a month ago. The one who cooked, cleaned, smiled, folded laundry like it was an act of devotion. That version of me had been slowly dying, quietly fading into routine. And Edward, he had pulled her back to the surface. Whether for better or worse. I wasn't invisible anymore. I closed my eyes and made a quiet promise, not to him. Not to Tommy, but to myself. I wouldn't run from this. Not from the truth. Not from who I had become. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what I really wanted. And whether that future included Tommy, or if I was already too far gone to turn back. This story, while dramatic and emotionally charged, reflects a very real issue in today's world: emotional neglect in relationships. In the rush of work, routines, and responsibilities, many couples drift into silence, forgetting that love needs attention to survive. If you ever feel invisible in your relationship, speak up before the distance becomes irreversible. Affairs don't always start with touch, they begin with unmet needs. Protect your connection by being present, curious, and honest. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories.